Is that good or bad for the sport? Good or bad for the sport? I pointed out last year they won 17 games by 40 or more points. That's insane. They end up winning, and look, it's a historic moment. And there is no effort for me to take away from what they've done. But for some reason, we choose to cross over. I've said this before. We choose to cross over something that happens in technically the same sport, but not actually the same sport. We don't use high school stats or high school records or high school dominance and compare it to college dominance. We don't compare college records or resumes to what happens in the NBA or WNBA. And the same should occur between men's and women's basketball. It's the same, but it's a different sport. Right? The rules are a little bit different, but more than anything, the sexes are different. The skill is different. Correct? So how would I contextualize it? It's the greatest streak in the history of women's basketball, bar none. How do you compare it to 88 games at UCLA? Like, you don't. Why do you have to? I don't understand. If anything, to me, that, again, diminishes what happened in the women's game. Why do you have to compare it to the men's streak? Now, what's really happened is you have a juggernaut the likes of, well, you want to say Kentucky or Duke or whatever, where you're not losing 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 and done. You have 2 additional scholarships, which allowed you to load up your bench. You've taken them from one of the better leagues in the country and putting them into a lower tier league in comparison to the Big East, right? Like, I'm not here to poop all over the AAC, but the AAC is not the ACC. It's not the Big East. It's not the Big Ten. It's not the Big 12. It's not the Pac-12. It's not the same level of investment. What I've said about Houston in football is the same thing I feel about UConn in women's basketball. Like, you are fully invested in women's basketball. Like, you've gone all in on it. Between your arena, your practice facility, the quality of coach, the quality of staff, the amount of money put into recruiting. So you're putting a super elite high major into a league of some good, some low high major, and then some mid major just teams. Right? Like Tulane's women's team, Central Florida, East Carolina. Yes, East Carolina women's basketball sounds exactly as bad as it must be as bad as it sounds with me talking about it. Klug, did you watch even a minute of it last night?
No, I did not. But
yes,
we are talking about it.
I mean, we talk about the Knicks because, I mean, just because we talk about something doesn't make it good.
But I mean, we wouldn't be talking about women's college basketball at all if not for UConn being this level of dominant.
Sure, that's fair. I don't think it speaks well to the sport. When you can win 100 in a row and win with the level of dominance, I mean, like, look, you put them in a crummy league. If they were in the ACC, they'd probably lose a game. Florida State, Notre Dame, and Duke, and there's some other decent teams. They're in a bad league. They're in a bad league. And with that bad league, comes this level of dominance to where they can pick 5 or so, 7 or so other games. And the sport has overexpanded. There's a little bit of this too. You remember baseball before really steroids kicked in? You have to be in your late 30s enough to remember when they were talking about baseball overexpanding. They brought in the Marlins. They brought in the Rays. All right. They brought in the Marlins. They brought in the Rays. And there was a thought that baseball was too watered down. That's what's happened in the women's game. Remember, there's Division I scholarships to Lipscomb and South Carolina Upstate and North Florida, NJIT, Kennesaw State. These are Division I programs. Southern Utah, Montana, Northern Arizona. And the idea is, can those schools compete with UConn? No. But if UConn calls, you still go. Everybody else calls, and you're like, hey, can I start? And so while the starters are maybe the same level or a notch below that of UConn's women's team, the benches are far more depleted. Because why would you go somewhere, why would you go somewhere and sit on the bench when you can go somewhere else and start? So, look, it's a totally watered down sport. They're fully invested. They load up as if they're Duke, Kentucky, et cetera, and no one actually goes to the pros early. And so I'm not saying I'm not impressed by it, but the context of this sport as opposed to the context of men's basketball, it's incomparable. You cannot compare the two.